Voters in yesterday's pandemic-delayed primaries faced long lines, missing ballots, and locked doors as election officials struggled to keep up with turnout. That was the scene in Louisville's only polling place yesterday evening. Voters were banging on the doors, pleading to get in as the 6 p.m. deadline passed. Our Louisville affiliate reports by 5, a line of cars was wrapped around the Expo Center grounds, making parking impossible. A judge agreed to extend voting by 30 minutes, but denied a request to keep polls open later. Voters in New York City also faced struggles. Some polling locations opened late because of the city's overnight subway shutdown, while others changed locations less than a day before, causing confusion. Widespread reports of requested absentee ballots not arriving forced people to vote in person, but broken machines and missing poll workers pushed wait times in some areas to 2 hours. CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns joins me now with more on all of this. Hi, Caitlin. Great to have you with us. So because of the large number of mail-in ballots, it could be days before most results come in. But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell did win his Republican primary yesterday. What is the status on the race to face him?
Well, all eyes were on Kentucky last night because there was a very competitive, kind of last-minute competitive race there to find a candidate, a Democrat, that could go up against McConnell in November. And this really illustrates how quickly the ground has shifted just in the past month in terms of the reaction to the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, especially in Kentucky, in Louisville, where she was from, by the hands of police, and this movement that we've seen on the ground across the country in reaction to police violence. And so that really all came into play in that Kentucky Senate primary for the Democrats. You had Amy McGrath, who was at one time a highly publicized Democratic recruit. She ran for Congress in 2018 as part of that wave of women running for office that cycle. She wasn't successful in that congressional race, but she was able to raise a lot of money, and that made her a top recruit for the Senate race. She raised a lot of money in this race, but over the past month, as we've seen these protests around the country, and especially as Louisville has been at the heart of that, you had Charles Booker, a 35-year-old local lawmaker who is running against her and seems to have really made this a very close race. And so that really speaks to the moment that we're in politically, and that's why we're watching the outcome of this race, because we're seeing kind of this reaction when it comes to candidates and the calls even within the Democratic Party to have more diverse candidates who can speak to the moment that we're in now.
And then shifting to New York, Caitlin, we saw Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez easily win her primary, likely securing her a second term in Congress. We'll remember that her win, last cycle was a big upset. She entered the House in 2018, as an insurgent, knocking off a top-ranking Democrat. Who is trying to knock her off now?
Well, she was able to be victorious in her primary, but the reason that we were watching these New York races last night is because, we have just come off a Democratic presidential primary in which we saw the most diverse set of candidates that Democrats have ever seen running for president, and it ended up that Joe Biden is going to get the nomination. He came to be the victor in that contest as a more moderate Democrat and someone who's been around for a long time in politics. But now in New York and elsewhere, last night we're seeing this surge in candidates, particularly African-American candidates, kind of challenging the status quo within the Democratic party. And so last night you saw two longtime incumbents, Engel in New York and also Carolyn Maloney in New York. These are two longtime incumbent Democrats who have represented their respective districts for nearly 3 decades. Both chair really important committees, Engel as Foreign Affairs Chairman and Maloney as the Oversight Chairwoman. And they are locked in really close races. In Engel's case, Jamal Bowman, who we've had on our program before, ran against him and looks to be in the lead there. He's actually claiming victory right now. And in the case of Maloney, Suraj Patel, who had run against her last time around and wasn't successful, has made this a really close race. And so you're seeing these kind of insurgent candidates weighing challenges to longtime incumbents and being quite successful, if not beating them outright, at least making this somewhat of a wake-up call for the party that this is something to pay attention to, and that this is where kind of the base of the party really wants to focus. So something that Democrats are certainly watching coming out of New York and looking to apply those lessons around the country as we head into November.
And so overall, how differently did many of these races turn out compared to the way they appeared to perhaps be going before the pandemic hit and the nationwide Black Lives Matter protests?
Right, and remember, before the pandemic hit, these contests were scheduled to happen earlier, but because of coronavirus, lots of states pushed back their primaries and have been trying to figure out how to hold an election in a pandemic. So you've seen the ground politically shift very quickly over the past month. In more recent times, you would have seen women candidates really surging here, but now we are seeing how important the Black Lives Matter movement has been in terms of influencing the party, or at least trying to exert influence on the party and getting these members to, these lawmakers to really pay attention to what's going on here, that it's not just enough to kind of continue the status quo or get things back to normal, that they want to see real change. And that was something that was debated in the Democratic presidential primary, now really coming into a focus here. I think it's also important to note that these primaries, why we are watching them so closely, is because, as you mentioned, this is a show of how you can hold an election in a pandemic. So you're going to have a lot of challenges that these states really need to address. The getting people ballots in time, processing those ballots, the number of polls open to have voters actually come in has shrunk, and so these are all issues that are going to have to be kind of fleshed out and dealt with ahead of November, and a reason why we should kind of continue to hammer home that we may not get the results in November until a bit after Election Day.
Right. And of course, mail-in voting is a big issue that everybody is focused on right now, not just for these elections, but like you said, the presidential election. It is something that both President Trump and Attorney General Bill Barr have repeatedly attacked heading into November. On Sunday, Barr said mail-in voting, quote, absolutely opens the floodgates to fraud. Caitlin, you spoke to election security experts for your latest article on CBSNews.com. Did you find that to be true in your reporting?
The experts that we talked to say that it would be extremely, extremely difficult for foreign entities to tamper with mail-in ballots, and that this is something that is just unverified coming from the Attorney General and the President. We spoke to election officials across the country who say that, look, the processing of these ballots is a real science. These ballots come with all sorts of mechanisms to prevent against fraud, things like barcodes, you have secrecy sleeves, you have watermarks, you have a variety of different ballots, even in one county, depending on who is on the ballot and what issues are on the ballot. And so it would be very, very difficult to tamper with those mail-in ballots. And that's something really important because as the president keeps pushing this, there isn't evidence to back it up at all. Experts that we talked to say that foreign interference in 2016 was through a disinformation campaign. There was no evidence of trying to impact mail-in voting. And the reason that mail-in voting is going to become a big issue is because, as we mentioned, in a pandemic, people are trying to figure out how to conduct elections safely and give people access to be able to vote if they do not feel comfortable showing up in the polls. So you have 5 states across the country who have mail-in voting primarily, who have seen success with it. And so you're seeing a lot of states ask for more resources to scale up, but they are arguing that, look, it is very, very difficult for a foreign entity to try to tamper with mail-in ballots, and it just hasn't borne out in the evidence.
All right. Well, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.